Welcome to The Debate. I was making coffee this morning, just staring into the chrome drip tray, watching the steam curl up, and I had this weird moment, like a proper intellectual pause. Is this reality? Or is this just, the highest resolution graphic package available in the current update?
Welcome back from the Matrix, Neo. Or maybe just from being under-caffeinated. I imagine your coffee was still satisfyingly real and probably too hot to be purely computational.
Maybe. But you know how I love digging into this stuff? It sounds like paranoia, I know, but it loops right back to Nick Bostrom's simulation argument, doesn't it?
It really does. And I agree, it's fascinating how Bostrom's argument has kind of exploded. It's moved from this niche philosophy thing to something scientists and definitely Silicon Valley types are actually wrestling with. You hear these wild claims, right? Like Elon Musk saying the odds of us being in base reality are 1 in billions.
Exactly. And that figure, regardless of how hyperbolic it might sound, it gets right to the heart of our debate today. Given the statistical case for advanced civilizations running ancestor simulations, and maybe some hints that our universe has computational quirks, is it more rational right now to assume we live in base reality or, a computer simulation? I'm going to argue that the sheer mathematical likelihood, it kind of demands we lean towards simulation being highly probable.
Okay, I admire your dedication to the statistical long shot, truly. But, I come at it from a different angle. While the simulation hypothesis is definitely compelling, as a thought experiment, it hits some major scientific and logical hurdles. So I'm maintaining that our current limits, philosophically and scientifically, make the hypothesis basically unfalsifiable right now. And, logically unsound in some ways, which means we kind of have to stick with the simplest explanation: base reality.
All right, let's ground this in the numbers then, because that's where the argument really gets its punch. Bostrom's famous trilemma, right? It suggests one of 3 things has to be true across the cosmos. Either any species like us goes extinct before reaching that post-human tech stage.
Right. Option 1, doom.
Or option 2, they reach maturity, but they universally just lose interest in running super detailed historical simulations. Maybe it's boring, maybe it's unethical, who knows?
Okay, option 2, cosmic apathy.
Or, finally, option 3. If 1 and 2 aren't through, then we are almost certainly living in a simulation.
Those are the 3 possibilities, yes. And I'll grant you, that third one, it is statistically overwhelming if, and it's a big if, the first 2 are false.
Exactly. So, if we assume tech progress keeps going, right? And some post-human civilization gets to what they call a Type 2 Kardashev scale, harnessing the energy of a whole star, maybe using something wild like a theoretical matryoshka brain. Imagine the computing power.
Astronomical, yeah.
We are talking resources to run millions, maybe billions, of high-res simulations of their own past, all at once.
Trillions, even if they really wanted to explore every parameter.
Trillions. Okay, now compare that colossal number of simulated minds to the single original batch of biological minds, the base reality folks, their ancestors. If these simulations exist, the simulated people just vastly, vastly outnumber the real ones. So if you wake up one day and find yourself conscious, statistically, you're way more likely to be one of the trillions in the simulations than one of the originals. The odds are just stacked against us being the fundamental generation.
That's a powerful line of reasoning. I get the appeal. But I just don't buy that the odds are 1 in billions. Not yet. That statistical certainty, it requires us to assume we can just dismiss the first 2 possibilities in the trilemma perimeter without any actual evidence. And we can't do that yet.
But why not? If we accept that post-human tech could exist, why assume they'd stop or fail or just get bored? Seems unlikely, doesn't it?
Because from a scientific perspective, the simulation hypothesis, in its current form, it's unfalsifiable. A hypothesis that needs you to assume things about a whole other reality, one we can't see or test, that kind of steps outside empirical science. I was reading this really strong analysis by David Kipping. He tackled it using Bayesian reasoning. And his argument was,
Basically, if we don't have evidence either way yet, like crucially, we haven't made a conscious simulation ourselves,
Right, that's the key.
then the default assumption, just based on the principle of indifference, has to be closer to 50-50. It's not a near certainty until we actually prove it's possible.
Okay, I can concede that 50-50 might be the baseline today. But you admit that flips instantly the second we manage to create a conscious simulation ourselves. And we could be right on the edge of that.
We could be, we might be, but until that exact moment happens, we kind of have to default to the simplest explanation available. That's just, logical parsimony, Occam's razor. The simplest story for why we're here is we're just here in base reality. The simulation hypothesis, it requires this whole elaborate nested setup, hidden programmers, maybe virtual physics. It's just inherently way more complicated than the natural explanation. Why invent a simulator if the laws we see seem to work fine on their own?
See, that line of reasoning assumes that building this massive simulation requires God-level complexity from the get-go. I'm not so sure, because the simulation might be much, much easier to kickstart than you think. You're focused on complexity, but let me throw a different idea at you. Computational simplicity. Think about cellular automata.
Ah, okay. So you're suggesting the universe is basically just a giant version of John Conway's Game of Life? Little squares blinking on and off?
Kinda. Yeah, think about the game of life. You start with this simple grid, right? Each cell just follows incredibly basic rules about living or dying based only on its immediate neighbors. Super simple. Yet, from those ridiculously basic starting points, you get the emergence of unbelievable arbitrary complexity. Things that move, things that replicate. So the simulator, they might not need to code every single quark. Maybe they just set some fundamental rules, pressed play, and let the complexity, the physics, just emerge.
I see why that idea is appealing. It's elegant in a way. But let me offer a counter on that complexity and precision point. Cellular automata are cool models, for sure, but they kind of sidestep the real computational challenge of our specific universe. Our reality seems to be governed by incredibly precise, rigid laws, general relativity, the standard model, and crucially, by fundamental symmetries.
Symmetries? Like balance?
Sort of. Like rotational invariance. It means the laws of physics work the same no matter which way you turn. They don't change if you rotate your lab setup. Now, to simulate this universe, especially if you try to use computational shortcuts like, say, breaking down space-time into tiny, fixed blocks, like pixels.
Right, like a grid.
Exactly. If you make reality blocky or pixelated to save computing power, it's incredibly difficult to do that without messing up those fundamental symmetries that Einstein's theories rely on. Algorithms trying to reproduce our physics often clash with those symmetries if space-time isn't smooth and continuous. You can't easily cheat on the tiny scales and still get the large-scale universe exactly right without weird inconsistencies showing up somewhere. We haven't seen those inconsistencies yet.
Okay. But maybe the programmers didn't cheat on the physics. Maybe they wrote the physics. And maybe, just maybe, they left a signature in the code itself.
That's the ultimate implication, isn't it? If it's code, there's a coder.
Well, check this out. I found something digging around last night that, honestly, it kept me up. It makes the case that physics looks like it's written in code. There's this theoretical physicist, James Gates. He was working deep in the math of supersymmetry, like the really fundamental equations describing particles. And he found what looked stunningly like error-correcting code.
Error-correcting code? Like in computers?
Exactly like in computers. Sequences of bits structured in a way that mirrors the codes we use to detect and correct errors in data transmission, embedded deep inside the equations that might describe our reality. It suggests the universe might have this software failsafe built right in to self-correct. Now, why would base reality need internal error correction unless it was fundamentally some kind of information processing system?
That is a genuinely fascinating finding, and Gates's work is serious stuff, though I would frame it slightly differently. Finding computational elements within the laws of nature, while super interesting, doesn't automatically mean it requires an external computer running it all. Nature itself could be a kind of giant computation, But the real kicker, the thing that trips me up, is what we call substrate independence.
The idea that consciousness isn't tied to biology,
that it could run on silicon chips just as easily as our squishy brains? The hardware doesn't matter, only the software pattern.
Precisely. The whole simulation hypothesis basically depends on consciousness being computable, digitizable, transferable to a silicon substrate. But then you slam into the hard problem of consciousness. Computation, at its core, is syntactic. It's symbol manipulation, following rules, processing data. Consciousness, though, it involves qualia, that subjective inner feeling of what it's like to be something. The redness of red, the sting of regret, the sheer boredom of being stuck in traffic, like you mentioned.
So are you suggesting simulated people would just be philosophical zombies? Empty shells that look conscious but have no inner experience?
Well, we're forced to ask, can pure computation, just rule following, ever truly give rise to those rich, internal semantic qualities? You know, think about thought experiments like the Chinese room argument. If we are undeniably conscious, and I think we are, and if consciousness fundamentally resists being purely computed, if it's somehow intrinsically tied to our specific biological wetware, then the simulation hypothesis hits a massive wall. We can't be living in a computer simulation if our defining feature, consciousness, simply cannot be computed.
Okay, wait a minute. Even if the deep physics is super complex, and consciousness is this huge philosophical hurdle, the system still seems to use these weird optimization shortcuts. Exactly like a video game engine that's like struggling to render everything and save resources. I'm talking about the glitches, the weirdness.
Yes. We've arrived at the quantum weirdness section of the tour. Always a crowd pleaser.
Well, it is weird. Look at the double slit experiment. An electron, or whatever particle, acts like a wave, spreads out, goes through both slits at once. Standard stuff. But the moment you try to watch it, put a detector there to see which slit it went through, bam, the wave function collapses. Instantly, it snaps into behaving like a well-defined particle, choosing just one slit. It's as if the simulation only bothers rendering the high-resolution details of the particle's exact location when a conscious observer forces it to. It's rendering on demand.
Okay, the fact that observation causes wave function collapse is, well, it's arguably the central mystery of quantum mechanics. It certainly highlights the absolute limits of our current understanding, especially down at the Planck scale, where quantum gravity presumably takes over. But you're jumping from reality is profoundly weird and mysterious to, therefore, it must be a programmer cutting corners. That's a big leap.
But it gets weirder. What about the delayed choice experiment, Wheeler's idea, where the choice to observe now seems to affect whether the photon acted like a wave or a particle in the past? The electron or photon appears to change its past state based on a measurement choice made later. It messes with our whole sense of time and causality. It only really makes sense if you think of it like a program that doesn't care about linear time. It just saves resources by only calculating the necessary past coherence right before an observation forces its hand. It retroactively paints in the history to match the measurement.
Look, that quantum mechanics is bizarre. Yeah, not up for debate. It's deeply strange. And I concede it does have this flavor of mimicking a computational resource saver, but here's where we hit the scientific wall again. If the universe is discretized, if space-time is blocky, like you suggested earlier, to save resources, that should break that rotational invariance, those symmetries we talked about. And we should be able to see evidence of that, especially when we look at really, really high-energy particles coming from space. Physicists have been looking hard at ultra-high-energy cosmic rays for exactly this kind of effect. Any sign that space-time isn't perfectly smooth. And so far, nothing. No deviations suggesting a discrete, blocky structure have been convincingly observed. Until that kind of evidence shows up, it's just as plausible that base reality itself simply have these fundamentally weird quantum properties built in. Weird doesn't automatically mean simulated. And that kind of brings us full circle, doesn't it? The belief that we're simulated. Right now, it's fundamentally a philosophical argument, mostly built on those statistical probabilities you laid out. If we stick to scientific rigor, testability, and that principle of parsimony, Occam's razor, we're kind of stuck at that 50-50 baseline Kipping talked about. Until we hit the one single critical pivot point, the moment we manage to create a genuinely conscious simulation ourselves. If we ever reach that point, okay, then the odds flip dramatically against us being in base reality. I'll give you that. But until then, well, scientifically, we kind of have to proceed as if this is the fundamental layer.
I admire your dedication to scientific caution. I really do. But let's just zoom out for a second to the philosophical takeaway. Even if we are simulated, our experiences, right? The fear, the joy, the love, the taste of that slightly disappointing morning coffee, they're real to us. They're morally significant within the context of this simulation. And furthermore, think about the specific era we're living in right now. This precipice moment, you could call it. We're teetering between like self-destruction and maybe technological transcendence, maybe even creating simulations ourselves. This precise moment, it feels like the most interesting time a simulator would choose to study. The point of maximum tension, the highest stakes. If you were going to simulate any historical era, wouldn't this one be the most compelling?
That's actually a compelling point about the simulator's potential curiosity. Why simulate the boring bits? Fair enough. But I still need the evidence. That itch just won't go away.
Okay. Final thought then. If somehow, someday we develop the technology to actually talk to the programmer, the architect, whatever, what's the single most important question we should ask?
Honestly, I think I'd ask what the privacy policy is regarding my dreams. Seriously. But barring that,
Okay, aside from the user agreement fine print, the ultimate goal, like some researchers and even Elon Musk have suggested, has got to be asking what's outside the simulation, right? That's the only way to truly know if there is an outside.
a worthy goal for future simulated or real philosophers and scientists, I suppose. But for now, well, if we are Sims, I just hope the player remembers to hit save frequently and maybe gives me a raise tune.
Well, we'll leave the audience to ponder the texture and resolution of their own reality. Thanks for tuning into the debate. Keep exploring the material, keep questioning, and decide for yourselves.